Okay, hi Doris.
Hi, Susie. Great to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm glad we figured it out.
Yes.
All right, so let me actually go ahead and introduce you. And I'm just gonna read it from your website. We're having so many computer issues today. Here we go. Okay. So I have with me today Doris Bittar. She is a multi-disciplinary artist who closely follows history and intertwines it with pattern and decorative structures. I'm going to get back to that one. She was born in Baghdad, Iraq, of Lebanese parents, and a year later her parents returned to Lebanon. And just ahead of the civil Lebanese war, they immigrated to New York. She graduated from high school. Oh, that's where you graduated from high school. And then that imprinted in her a curiosity to bridge differences between people. After graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the State University of New York, oh goodness, I think I messed it up.
It's okay. I can pick up after that. I mean, I think immigrating to the United States had a very big impact on my life and my art, although I didn't know it at the time, you know. But and I grew up in a very diverse environment here, and not so kinds of college, high school had a huge impact. So you had Jewish culture, African American culture, Italian culture, and then this sort of slim 10% of other, which was my family and a mishmash of other people. So, and that was growing up in New York. And I think it just helped me to see my own Middle Eastern culture, my own Arab culture, as a way of sort of understanding these differences, because I think the Middle East has operated under a multicultural situation for centuries, and that actually it's sort of hardwired in a lot of Middle Eastern people to be able to make these bridges. I see the Arab art as a result of that. I really do, because even though it looks very distinct, what we call Islamic art, I don't like the name Islamic art, because I think it was many sources, many sources, and it wasn't just religious. Science, Byzantine influences from China, Africa. I mean, it was really an intersection for all of that. Yet the work created was of such a deep, wonderful aesthetic, and very distinct looking. You know, when you think of Middle Eastern art, you think it's very distinct looking, even though it has all these sources. How could something with so many sources be so distinct looking? So, I see that pattern as a vehicle for me to explore all kinds of things, colonial issues, history, searching for contemporary patterns and designs. And I see the Middle East as a portal into world art. I really do. So, and I want to underscore that, because often I think artists feel like they're in some kind of ghetto, depending upon what your ethnicity is. And so this might be a ghetto, but it's a really wonderful one that bridges to the rest of the world. So I have no problems with that. Although I did have that worry for many years, that I was going to be in a ghetto. And it's only made my life richer, broader, more connected. So I'm certainly not feeling that way anymore.
So what are you up to these days?
Well, I'm in New York for a few months, another month and a half. And we were very lucky to get an apartment that doesn't necessarily afford me a studio space, but what I do is literally roll out butcher paper over the dining room table, wipe the butcher paper, and that table becomes my studio.
Nice.
And the wall behind me.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is this your work, the one behind you?
It is, yeah. It's hung over the mirrors that are on this wall, which are kind of like and I didn't want to take the mirrors down. I thought, well, it's a cozy place. I didn't want to change it much, but let me see if I can give you a little bit of a view. There's all kinds of work I'm doing. I'm again working with pattern, and maybe before I get to that one, I can show you a piece I just completed, and then one that has maybe less sort of literal meaning. But I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, nice. Yes, I can definitely.
So it's a pattern. I cut out this gray lattice. I joined and glued all these security envelope pattern designs, all uniform, all the same in this case. And then cut out this pattern, which to me is kind of uniquely, we consider it an Arab pattern. I distorted it quite a bit to make it fit with the Rand McNally map behind it. But it's a pattern that originated in China, according to my research, and it was a square, based on a square unit, and it went to India, where it got turned into a parallelogram. It got squashed, and then it went to Syria. The Syrians didn't change it. They liked the squashed parallelogram. And then it didn't really appear anywhere else in the Middle East, except for maybe in Alhambra. There's some of this pattern. But it became a kind of very favorite pattern. And then I always joke that it went to California, and I distorted it and put a little wiggle in it, and that I continue to sort of transform it. But it has the map of the world behind it, because I want China in there, I want India in there, I want North America in there, to show it. It's a pattern I've been excavating for many, many years. And here's a piece, not quite finished yet. It's going to go behind white paper that I'm working on, also hand cut. And, it's not there yet, so I can use it as a veil over myself. You can get a close-up of that. So that piece isn't finished, but playing with these patterns as veils just over my own face made me feel that they had a sort of performance potential. So the ones on the wall here, these are the windows of security envelope patterns. And I turned it into like a little spiral,
nice.
Like a snail. But, the potential of it works. Some kind of performance piece is there. They're pretty resilient. And then the back is really quite lovely too.
Beautiful.
Notation. So this one here behind me is the back. So I wanted to just look at it as structure. I know you can't probably see it or take it in, but
see most of it.
It's the back side. There's a video of me draping it over myself on the. I can send you the link. But the backside shows all these really intricate patterns. Do you want me to take it down?
No, you're fine. We can see it this way.
I can hide behind it. See,
What is the material?
And I don't really know what the meaning of this is. This is hot off the press. I'm still taking it in and trying to figure out for myself what it could mean, except that it came from the idea of, our part of the world and the entire world is less secure these days. And we're obsessed with security. And so that's why security envelopes, I've been collecting these for a long time. And at the same time, the patterns.
Yeah, it looks very fragile too, so.
Well, it's glassine and paper. It is fragile, but it's a little more resilient than you might think. Whenever I play with it, I have to go back and then I have to repair it a little bit.
So yeah, I know you've always been drawn to pattern and you do all these collages. but you've also done some painting too. Have you been painting at all recently?
I have been painting. I'm not publicizing that. I'm a little more like just working on these, but I paint. I haven't been painting on this trip because bringing paints to this butcher paper and I'm in a home would present certain hazards.
Mm-hmm.
But I have been painting. I'm just not quite ready to share those with you. And the painting ranges from, as you know, I mean, I've done very large scale paintings that have to do with colonialism and then post 9/11 patterns of the flags. And but right now I'm focused on this. I am doing some paintings now. I'm just not, and a lot of it is based on Arabic numerals and still lives and a myriad of things. I'm just not quite ready to share it. I'm working more with paper right now. I work, on many fronts. I work on many fronts. So, there's always something going on. I write, I do research, and painting is not out of the picture. It's just not, this next thing is just not, I've been painting Arabic numbers.
Oh, nice.
And they're abstract paintings that show the number of angles the numbers have that correspond, literally the numerical system the Arabs made, which is a very geometric one. Yeah. And so I'm exploring that. And the paintings are this big. They're not big, but I've done, about 30 of them.
So that's different than the work I know you for, because when I met you at the Arab American National Museum, you had donated this huge triptych, was it?
Yes, and it was very figurative, and it was based on the painter Fragonard, his painting War and Peace.
Yes.
And it was at the beginning of the Iraq War. And I guess I'm not totally shying away from figuration, but I'm a little less interested in it right now. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean I won't go back to it. Mm-hmm. It's just not where my head is right this second. Another thing I'm doing, I mean, my view of pattern is quite broad. So you've heard some of it, and the whole idea of pattern is structure. Pattern has been denigrated over the decades, maybe the centuries, as somehow less important than other kinds of pursuits. Mm-hmm. And because it's considered, in the last 100 years, pattern has been considered fill-in. And there have been groups that come along and individual artists that come along that challenge this idea, like Matisse and the pattern painting movement artists in the 70s. And I was just very interested in, well, what makes something a fill-in pattern, and how is it different than a grid, which all our skyscrapers are based on, decorative. That's a repeating form, that's a pattern. And so I ask myself that question all the time, and I say, okay, I look at the building across the street and it's a grid. Why isn't it considered a pattern? Well, because it looks very utilitarian, it's not pretty. But why not? Most patterns fall into a grid. And so patterns, and that grid can be taken apart as long as the patterns connect. And then patterns are lattices. Lattices are things that repeat, and lattices hold things. You can hold things on them. You can hang something on it. You can grow a plant on it. You can excavate with it. You can, all kinds of stuff. You can chart data on a grid. And so looking into data is something I'm also doing at this time. And I'm looking at data on migration and labor. And I've been a community organizer and activist my entire adult life. And it's just something I don't usually mix with my art. And I certainly don't mix my art into my activism, because that's too scary, because you're working with people and you don't want the goal to then be art, art rather than the goals that you've agreed to with other people. So activism means I'm working with other people. We've decided what our goals are, and but it informs my art. I don't let it inform directly. I've been very careful about that. More recently, though, I'm just like, why not let it in, to the art, as long as the art doesn't go to activism. Yeah. Because I think that messes up your motivation. and your goals and your sequencing of how to get from point A to point Z. So I just don't do that. I mean, maybe it can work, but it can't be forced because we're working with human beings and you can't mess that up. But so I've been working with refugees in San Diego, and I'll be going back to that after this retreat that I'm having in New York. And we've been Syrian refugees, especially, who need English, Syrian, who've been here about a year. Trump has kind of ended that, but most of them are in San Diego. We have the largest refugee community in the United States and the largest number of Syrians in the city. So I've been working with them, and I've been looking at data on migration and labor. And as you know, some of my activism has been labor related. I cut my teeth in my early 20s on union labor organizing for almost 5 years. And well, I don't know if it's like a lot of things, but when you are working with people and you get to know them intimately, and it's a kind of intimacy with strangers, just decide you're going to work towards a goal. It kind of affects your life. And I've always said I've been infected by the union or labor, how it breaks down barriers and brings people together. It's just something really quite magical. Not talked about, it's always talked about in terms of this antagonism, fighting the boss and getting what you want. But really, there's an amazing kind of intimacy that happens in these campaigns, and you get to know people and meet people who are very different from you. Mm-hmm. You work together to better all your lives, and it's just a very beautiful experience. So I'm very interested in migration and labor now, and I'm looking at actual data. I'm being guided by economists towards that data, and then I take that data, perfectly good data, very good high quality data, and I corrupt it into a landscape. And that landscape looks like the terrain that refugees have to traverse. So this is actually my main project here in New York. And right now it's mostly computer based. And I have some prints, but I'm working out the data. And I'm looking at drownings in the Mediterranean, for example. And then, well, that'll be a seascape. I mean, it sounds horrible, but so that's what I'm doing right now. That's my main focus. And these envelope things are just for me getting away from the damn computer and making something with my hands. And it might have some resonance. I just don't know why. I collected these for 15 years, these envelopes. I mean, I've got boxes full. I've got 3 drawers full, and they're all by color, by type, by, and I'm proud to say the United States has, I think, the best security envelope pattern variety in the world. We're the best. Because I've been to other countries in Europe, and I'm like, this is it? You have 3 patterns in Germany? You've got, we've got like 100 at least.
Well, that's always good for an artist. You can.
Yeah. I might be wrong. I haven't been to every part of the world, but it seems like there's the printers who print envelopes and whatever in this country, that whole industry, they compete with each other. Yeah. And there's a lot of variety, so that's kind of nice.
Yeah, I love your insight into the whole pattern thing, because I feel like if the universe is geometric, right, if it's really made of geometry, then that's pattern in itself. So everything is made of pattern.
Exactly.
There's no getting away from it.
A basic minimalist grid is pattern.
That's right, exactly. And I also, for some reason, I always see you as an activist. Although you said you try to be very subtle in your art, to me, like, you stand out as an activist to me. But maybe it's because I also know that you're working on other projects too, so that could be the reason. So how did you become an artist, Doris?
Well, you know, there's some talent in my family, and I can always say my father taught me how to draw, and my mother's sense of delicately, you know, she's very creative, and she painted, and certainly a lot of family influenced me. And I got lots of praise for drawing and that sort of thing. I think, though, that language is very important to me too, but I didn't get a head start in language, and so I think the visual arts was just a way of expressing myself. When we immigrated, I was almost 6 years old, and at that time, speaking your native tongue as you learn a new language was frowned upon. Whereas 3-4 years later, it completely changed and said, oh no, you must speak your native language. So in my household, when we immigrated here, we were in New York briefly, and then in New Jersey, Union City, New Jersey, and Newark. My parents stopped speaking French or Arabic to us. It was just English. And I remember my first year was a year of absolute silence. I mean, I did not speak. I don't remember speaking. I remember understanding the Arabic and French that they were speaking to each other, my parents, in our home. And then at school, I just was a pair of eyes, you know, and I used to draw. And I used to get up in the middle of a classroom, this is in first grade, and go to the window and stare out the window and come back and draw. And that's all I did the entire year. I almost got held back. Yeah. And then I think the month of May, something clicked. Month of April, something clicked. And I understood everything around me. I understood the language completely, the English language. And then I had a lot of workbooks to catch up on. And when the teacher told my mother, I think she's mentally disabled. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, who knows what she said then? She's behind. And my mother was like, she knows how to read French. She was learning Arabic before we immigrated. So she started school early. She's gifted, you know, all these things. And I didn't want to stay back. They wanted to put me back in first grade. And so I was very motivated. So for a whole month, I did the work for the entire year. And I graduated to second grade. So, but what I did that first year was draw. That's all I did. I didn't write, I didn't speak. I was just a sort of a big pair of eyes, you know, taking everything in and drawing. And what did I draw? I drew things we saw in our little TV, you know, cowboys and Indian movies, and I drew those. I mean, my first drawings, I don't have them, but they were of Native Americans, oddly. I didn't know what I was drawing, just somebody with feathers and, you know, I mean, some stereotype probably. But, you know, we used to watch Bonanza on TV, and, and I Dream of Jeannie and I Love Lucy, and these are the things that influenced me.
Have you ever done anything besides be an artist, like work-wise? Have you worked in other fields besides?
Well, I was, yeah, I mean, you know, my first job was at Burger King.
Nice.
You didn't mean that. Labor organizing was a job. I was a bookshelver in the library, and then a book reader to make sure all the books are in order in the stacks. And I was then a research assistant a couple of times for a professor. And then I went to graduate school and did teaching. And so what I've been doing really the last 23 years is teaching painting and drawing and design. First at the University of California, San Diego for 14 years, and then the last 8 years or so at California State University, San Marcos, which is in North San Diego County. So I've been teaching, honestly, that's, and then making my art and applying for grants and occasionally getting something, selling something, you know. I'm lucky in that my husband has a stable job, and although my income was greatly needed getting our kids through school, that's largely how I've worked, you know. So I have a somewhat more flexible schedule. It's not a 9 to 5 schedule, and I was teaching for a long time, about 4 courses a year. So full time is about 5 or 6. So it was almost full time work, and then continuing my community activities alongside.
Why do you do what you do?
Excuse me?
Why do you do what you do?
Well, when I was younger, I was like, well, this is what I'm good at. What I really wanted to do was be a lawyer for Native American rights. That's what I wanted to do. And this was before I understood Arabs were not being attacked, and it's before I understood the Palestinian diaspora situation and that was going on there. And then I thought I'd be a poli-sci major. I just thought I'd be a lawyer, civil rights lawyer or something like that. And but there were all kinds of circumstances that somehow I just said I should just do what I'm good at. I'm good at making art, and I decided I wasn't good at the other stuff. And so I went to art school, and then I think when you make art, it's kind of it's a little scary because one of your questions was to ask of you're kind of going into the depths of your abilities and disabilities in every way, mental and physical. And it's gotten a lot easier and it's a lot more fun, but I think when I was younger, it was a really scary thing. And I didn't know what was happening to me, and I'd have letdowns afterwards. So I didn't know what was happening to me when the work seemed to be making itself. And those seem to be very magical moments. Yeah. And maybe it's art therapy. I don't know what it is. I'm not afraid to say that art has a therapeutic, but when I make art, if a day or a week goes by, I don't make art, I don't feel very well. I'm compelled to continue doing it. When I was younger, there was a letdown. There was a letdown sometimes after a show, after a piece, it's almost like you have to start another piece. Yeah. Can't, now, not so much. And it's more just fun and joy and discovery and learning. And I'm grateful for that I toughed out the tough years, that I kind of continue to do it because you get something from it. There's what I call, I tell my students this, it's, after you've been working on something a while, an hour, 2 hours, the work, especially in painting, it begins to paint itself. And there's some kind of kinesthetic thing that happens where you just become a vehicle for something else. Your ego leaves, your ego leaves the room, and you are just a kind of physical instrument for something. And that's just a really wonderful, magical feeling. And I get it most often when I paint, which is probably why I'll never quit painting. I mean, I get it most often, but it takes a long time to get there. You have to be working all day on something before, and then it's the end of the day. So you figure out how to shorten that prep time when your ego finally leaves the room and the work can develop as it should. So those are some of the things I think about why I make art, and that's why art for me can't just be about computer, digital. I sometimes get that feeling in Photoshop if I've been working on something, I'm cooking, but I get it most often from painting.
Yeah.
And you're a painter, I think you understand that.
It's the accessing of the flow states.
Yes, that was your question. Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that I like to ask. It was part of my research, and that's why I thought I'd just carry it on, because I interviewed artists for my dissertation, and I thought it would be a nice question to ask, especially that I will be interviewing artists who are not painters. So I want to see if that would vibe.
I think it happens in all the arts. But maybe more so in the more tactile arts, and paint is quite tactile, as is pottery.
Well, yeah, the painting movement itself is really flowy. It's kind of like the brush is dancing on the canvas in a way.
That's right. There's this calligraphic, that's right, and it comes from your body. Yeah. And it comes from your gut, you know.
Yeah, beautiful.
Even if you're doing very careful work, something happens at some point. You have a plan in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you don't have a plan in mind, but let's say you have a plan. Something happens at one point where the painting is saying, mix another color. Or look at your palette. There was an accident that happened on your palette, and why does your palette look so much more interesting than your painting? And so your ego literally, I mean, just has to leave the room, and you have to listen to your palette.
Exactly, yes.
And the painting could change radically the last 10% of it. You might think it's finished. I've realized my vision that I had before I began. And then all of a sudden that painting takes a sharp turn in a different direction. And because of some physical something that happened, that kinesthetic, that something is happening where you're not the instrument anymore. You're the instrument, you're not the lead anymore. You got to leave the room and you got to let the painting happen, whether it's slow or gestural or how did that green get on here? But boy, it looks great, doesn't it? Maybe the whole painting will be green.
Yeah.
You know?
I love how you put that. Yes. Because if you don't follow that, then, I mean, I've seen a lot of people who are trying to control what they're painting, especially if they haven't painted before. They feel like they have to plan it out, and like, you know, it's almost like a paint by numbers. And I'm like,
it could be.
Move away from that, you know, like, let's just flow with it and see what happens.
Yes.
Yeah, beautifully said. So, what is your least favorite thing about being an artist?
Well, the professional aspect.
Uh-huh.
Having to go and peddle yourself, and I'm doing it less and less. I'm showing. I have no shortages of exhibits that I'm in, but I don't have a gallery. I did, and it's closed several years ago. And since then, I just, you know, I'd love to have a gallery, because even though I organize and I might do performances and things, you know, I have a commodity here. I'd like to sell it, you know, help put the kids through college, or, you know, just something. It'd be nice to have a gallery, but I hate going into galleries. I mean, they're often very hostile places.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you certainly can't walk in there with a portfolio in your hand. Then you're like marked, and you get treated even worse. And so that's unfortunate, but it's my plan the next few weeks here. I've been stalking some galleries. That's what it feels like. I don't know. Does it feel like, I mean, it feels like you're stalking them. And really what you want, I think, I mean, advice after all these years of doing ridiculous things to try to get attention. Like, I'd like to sell my work, please. I think I fit into this gallery, and they all say we don't deal with unsolicited. So how are you going to know I exist? You know. But now what I do when I go in a gallery and I see work I like, I talk to the gallery owner about that work. And it's become more important for me to pursue it as a conversation and go frequently. And I found that there's some galleries that consistently have work I like, and they get to know me, and we talk about the work that's there. I don't bring myself up at all.
Yeah.
So I still don't have a gallery.
Interesting.
But that's the thing I like the least. And then applying for grants. And I think, you know, they should just give all artists money without even an application. Just, you're an artist here.
That'd be great.
That's what they did during the Works Progress Administration. You didn't have to really apply. I mean, you had a name, you had a social security number. You had to show that you were a practicing artist, and they were not very judgmental. And that's where the abstract expressionists came out of, and women as well. You know, I think we should go back to that. I think someone who decides to be an artist is giving up a luxurious life. to try to connect things between people to express themselves. And if they weren't able to be an artist, if I weren't able to be an artist, I might be a bag lady collecting other kinds of trash.
Yeah.
But I think, and they're cutting it out of schools, and it's just very, very sad. So that's the only thing. Otherwise, I'm really happy. My productive time is more joyful. My kids are grown, so that helps, and they're doing well, and that helps. I'm a pretty happy place right now.
You have 2 children, right?
I have 2 boys, both grown now. One is 20, the other is 26. They're 2 men, grown boys. And they both have a creative side. They tend to be more into writing. One of them just published a book, in fact. So, and it's a very good book too. But anyway, yeah. So, life is good right now.
Nice.
I just don't have a gallery.
I'm glad to hear that. You know what, galleries, I have this feeling about galleries, and it's not to say that all of them are the same, but I feel like they're kind of exploitive to artists, but also, I mean, we need them in a way, especially that most of artists cannot survive without a gallery to help us promote our work and sell it. But
well, it's a partnership. It's a partnership. I don't see galleries so much as exploitative. Honestly, artists' rights are in a sad state right now. I mean, they always have been. And now might be an opportunity to challenge that. A lot of museums and college galleries exploit artists more than a gallery. A gallery, they sell your work, and you get half of what the sale cost. That's can be quite a bit of money sometimes.
Yeah.
Whereas a museum or other spaces where I do show, the issue of money just doesn't come up unless you bring it up. And in the past, at one time, I brought it up. I said, I see that this traveling show is going to be funded all the way except for the first step. Well, you want these paintings, it's going to cost me $500 to send them to you at minimum. And this was 10 years ago. And just for bringing that up, I was kicked out of the show.
Oh, wow.
So, they have to bear in mind that artists are working. I may have a more stable income than other artists. I don't have a super stable one, but it's pretty good. Most artists do not. And if they're married or with another artist, forget it. They don't, they don't have money enough to have a family. They don't have money enough to have a retirement. This is like 90% of artists don't have the money to buy their materials, and yet they're asked to give. And most artists are women. And maybe it's time for us en masse to say enough is enough. So, I think it's time. I'm not going to keep quiet.
I agree. That's why I wonder that, 50% of the sales of an artwork, I feel like that's a lot. I mean, you're not the one who was standing in front of the canvas for hours and hours and putting parts of you into it, and yet you're still like being rewarded half of.
Well, a gallery, I ran a gallery for almost 2 years, and I was making money, but not much. Then my rent went up and I went out of business. I was making an average of $500 a month after the rent was paid, blah, blah, blah. Oh, so that is not a lot of work. That is not a lot of money for all the work I put in it. And I stopped making art during this time. I was doing small things and sketchbooks, so I actually really respect and appreciate the people who take the risk to go become gallerists. Sometimes they have some inheritance that helps them, a stipend that helps them, but it usually isn't a lot of money, and it's often a loss. So I think 50% is okay. Pretty good. I tried giving my artists more than 50%. I gave 60 sometimes. Or I gave 50, but I paid for them to travel to come to their openings. Or, and they stayed in my home. And so I just tried to minimize the costs, but I did not make very much money. And I had a very nice gallery, and it probably could have succeeded, you know, if I owned the building it was in. So I don't know. I think 50% is fine, really.
Yeah. Well,
You know, I mean, it's better than paying $500 to be part of a traveling exhibit. You know what I'm saying? And that's the position we're in. So I'm often happy if I balance zero, but that's not good. We shouldn't be balancing zero. Do musicians give free concerts all the time? We're expected to give, you know, I think when an artist shows in a museum, they should get an honorarium and all their expenses should be paid, period. And shipping back and forth should be paid by the museum, by the gallery, by the university gallery, whatever it is, private, public, whatever it is. And that rarely happens. So it doesn't happen for the vast majority of us.
True. I agree. So, where can we see your work these days? Do you have any shows coming up?
Well, there's one at the Institut du Monde Arabe that was delayed a little bit. It's a big project group show that is coming up. Another project I'm working on, that'll probably happen after the new year to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Institut du Monde Arabe. I have a piece up now in San Diego that I collaborated with Nada Shelby on, and it's called autocorrect, and it's a video based on our working with those two words, turning them into a lattice. And then Nada, did I say Nadia? Nada Shalabi. She turned it into a very simple GIF animation, and it's being shown at the City University College in San Diego now. And then I was just in an exhibit on Governor's Island. Now, my apologies, my website is about 5 years out of date, and I'm gonna upgrade that.
That information is not available on the website?
The new stuff is not on the current website. So that, to me, that's a kind of online gallery. But I haven't had trouble showing, so I'm not worried about it, really. I have a lot of work. I probably have work for 2 different exhibits that'll look like 2 different artists. You know, I'm not worried about it. You know, the other thing I do is I write a lot. I have almost 45 publications. And a lot of them are short reviews, but there's some essays in there. And so that one will be coming out in this journal called Absolute Humidity, coming out of South Asia. And they interview Gulf labor, of which I'm a member of. Those are the artists that are saying, you know, you can't build new cultural institutions in Abu Dhabi or anywhere on the backs of exploited labor. So that's something that I don't do art for that, but I write about it. I'm part of that group, and so those are some of the other things where my name has been put out there.
How can we access your publications? Do we just
some of them are on my website, but not all. I think there's like 7 or something. Then they're kind of old. It's out of date.
Yeah.
Al Jadid, the magazine, literary arts magazine out of Los Angeles, usually has. I usually write a review or 2 or an essay in that magazine, and it comes out about 4 times a year, I think. And I've written in other publications, but that's the main one. I really like that magazine, and I give it out to people just so they could see there's other voices out there.
It's called Al Jadid?
Al Jadid, or What's New.
Yeah, what's
new. The New, right? I think it translates literally the new.
The new, yeah.
I joke about it, you know. The editor, Elisha Lala, jokes about it. People say, what? Al Jihad? And he says, no.
It
I
all
was
sounds
indeed.
the same.
Yeah, and and they've appropriated that word jihad from us. I mean, you know,
That's funny.
it's a good Christian Arab name, right? The people I know whose names are jihad are Christian.
That's
Like,
right. Yeah.
all it means is one who struggles. Like, this holy war thing has been completely
We're all
appropriated.
jihadists.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, what's her name? Feiruz has a song, jihadi, this and that. And she's just talking about her struggle, and they've taken that word and messed it up. I mean, it's really unfair what's happened to
Yeah, there you go.
words in Arabic.
There's an exhibit that we can produce.
I know. What's new? But people say, what?
Yeah,
Jadid? Jadid? Shu hada? Jadid?
I love that.
You're having a show on jihad?
I want to do that now. Let's do it.
Maybe we should do it. It should be this sort of dysfunctional perception of Arabic.
I think if anyone can pull it off, it'd be you. So hey,
Well, we can partner.
Let's do it. I think it's a great idea. What is your favorite art these days, or just one artwork or artist that you've come across that you're kind of like following secretly?
There's a lot of wonderful painting out there, and a lot of it is abstractionist and almost a revisit to modernist issues, and those are influencing me a lot. Shara Hughes is an artist I really like. She shows here in New York at the Rachel Uffner Gallery. And I met her the other day. I bought her book and she signed it. Didn't say a word about my being an artist. Not really. Because I just wasn't appropriate. It was her day to shine and sign books. So, and I've been in that gallery many times. Of course, I'd love to show there. But I would say the most compelling thing I've seen while in New York a few weeks ago was Mary Kelly's work, which is done through projections. She's a longtime feminist artist. I think she's in her 70s now. And projections onto graphically realized, like a photographic screen, but the material is lint from a dryer. And she has her black lint, and then she puts screens in them, and then she's able to create these images, and they're quite large, made out of lint, pristine looking. And they explore recent political phenomenon and trace it back to the history of feminist protest in the arts and elsewhere. So, I was really moved by that show. She's really out there. I mean, just Google Mary Kelly and lint. But I love it that it's lint, it's this woman's material, right? And it's kind of taking it out of the dryer. Although honestly, my husband does the laundry in our house. But so, so she'll do a black wash, a white wash, and she'll get these different kinds of, and she literally screens it. So she blocks out where the lint is going to be or not be to get different colors. And these images are just stunning. I mean, they're made out of dust.
Yes, I'm always curious about like what goes on in an artist's mind to come up with a concept like that. Like how does this concept become something? Like how does she what goes on that you decide that you're going to use lint to
in Mary's case, she started out photographing her son's cloth poopy diapers, back in the 60s and 70s. I mean, so she's always just been very observant of her own environment and her own role and where she's at in whatever part of her life. She's always been very hard at work too, but she did raise a son. And I don't think that's maybe where the lint came from, but she pays attention to the things that women come in contact with and takes it apart. When I started collecting security envelope patterns, I didn't know what I was going to use them for. I just thought, oh my God, once I started noticing that every paycheck, every bill had a different pattern in it, I got very excited, and I collected them for years before I did anything with them. So I collected them for 15 years. That was, what was that, like 1999, 2000. I didn't start using them, and then it was to make still lives in 2004. Then I had begun my Stripes and Stars series of the American flag. So I made a couple, 3 or 4, maybe 4 pieces that were the American flag made out of security envelope patterns. So I have those. And then I started making the maps in 2011. So we're talking almost 10 years before I really seriously started to work with them past. But it was because I was just attentive, you know.
It's almost like 15 years ago, you knew that this was going to happen on some level.
I really didn't. And there were times when I said, why don't I just put these in the recycle bin? This is ridiculous. They're taking up room.
Yeah.
So they were in boxes. So then I went to IKEA and I got a drawer thing that I assembled to put them in a drawer. And so now this is taking up room in my studio. I don't have a huge studio. So, you know, I was like, why am I doing this? Why do I collect? And I collect other things. I'm embarrassed to tell you what, because I haven't figured out what to do with them yet. So, so they just sit around, and, you know, and then suddenly, and then the envelope part, I ignored for a long, long time because I cut them out, but I couldn't bear to throw them out.
Yeah.
Now I'm cutting them out like crazy. I'm like, I don't have enough windows. Oh no, I'm going to run out of material.
Now you have to collect.
No, you know, I don't think you always know. And it doesn't mean that everything you collect or think about or are attentive to is going to turn into art.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like you gather those materials. You don't just always go to an art store. You notice your environment and how you're an actor in it and what it is you're doing. And so in Mary's case, it's really her performing her life directs her towards pieces. She's very sensitive to just what is happening to her and things that she has in common with others.
So yeah, it's about like being observant, I suppose.
Exactly. I mean, we're observers. We're, you know, the whole thing about the artist as godlike creating is really not so. That's what trips you up and makes you have a big down. You know, but if you're just learning, you're observing, you're collecting, you're talking to people, you're, you know, then you stay stable and you continue to make art without judging yourself so much. And that's what enables more art. Not some, I'm a goddess, I'm going to create now. So Mary, very powerful woman, but she was looking at those quiet details.
Yeah.
Discarded details of her life.
It's all in the details. Would you still choose to be an artist if you were to come back again in another life?
I read that question and I was like, I hope she doesn't ask me that.
Wow, so that means this was the question I should have asked to begin with. Just kidding. Why?
You know, I still wonder, why didn't I become a lawyer and be a civil rights activist for Mesoamericans or the indigenous Americans in the States, or now, you know, it would be the Black Lives Matter or Arab Americans. We're not in such, you know,
I know.
we kind of pass for white, you know.
Talking to one.
Yeah. So, and I do that work. But maybe I reach more people making the art that resonates about those issues. So I don't know, you know, if I were to come back, and I mean, my life isn't over, and it's very expansive. I mean, I make musical instruments. I don't know where I write. I'm an activist. I don't have to be in the painting ghetto or the Arab artist ghetto, I don't feel that I'm in any kind of, I have any kind of constraints in my life right now. I may have when I was younger, but I think those are the constraints of youth. I mean, wouldn't it be great if I had my mind and I could go back to age 20?
Yeah.
That's impossible. So
It's just the party time.
I do think a friend of mine who's a poet, Diane Gage, whose poems I absolutely love, and told me, Doris, I think you would have been a poet or a writer if it weren't for your immigration, that I might have been less inclined to go the visual route. But I was like, I could still be a poet and a writer. It's like, I don't feel like that door is closed. But
you weave the two together, like
yes.
Atel Adnan.
And another project I'm working on with Gerda Govine, who is originally from St. Thomas and grew up in New York and now is in California. She is coming up with poems, and I'm going to help her visualize them for an exhibit that's coming up in a year at the California Center for the Arts. So that's another show I'll be in down the road, and I'm going to collaborate with her. And then I'm working with Nada Shalabi. We've got a whole bunch of word pieces that are very exciting and coming up. So, yeah.
I'll be looking forward to see what else is going to emerge for you. This was a great conversation, Doris. I wish you were my neighbor so we can have more lovely conversations like these.
Well, I have to make myself over there to Dearborn.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
And you're welcome to come to San Diego anytime. We're empty nesters now, so we have space.
I have traveled so much to California in the past few years, and I've never been to San Diego.
Oh, well, you're welcome to come.
That'd
really
be lovely.
How old are your kids?
Mine are 18 and 16.
Oh, okay. So yeah, they can be left at home a little bit,
yeah,
right?
Definitely. I've left them a lot so far. So.
Okay.
It was a pleasure, and stay in touch. Maybe we will do some jihad exhibit at some point.
I think that'd be a riot. Literally, no.
I definitely want to explore that. So let's talk.
Yeah, I mean, you're an artist yourself too. You're artist, curator, writer, PhD. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you so much. It's your questions are great, and it was fun.
Great, thank you. I'm glad that we were able to pull it off. I know we had a little bit of a tough time getting started, but I'm glad that it worked out.
Yes, definitely.
Good day, and I appreciate your time. Let's
Thank
stay in touch.
Okay, thanks, Susie. Bye-bye.